Let's show you something new. The navd command. When you first do it, all it's doing is telling you how you've used it in the past. Nothing exciting yet. Now I've got something on the list. I've got something on the stack, two different places that I could navigate to very easily. Let's go to the first one. Pretty easy. There's a listing. Let's go to the second one. And there's a listing. Okay, now we're going to unpack that a little bit. This video is about a new way to conveniently navigate your favorite directories at a Linux prompt. If I look at my present working directory, it's /user/dana, and that is exactly the same as the tilde shown there, so either one can be typed for convenience. I'm going to do it the old way. cd movies, and I'm now in the current directory of movies, and I can cd to documents, and now I'm in the documents directory. And if I want to go back to my home directory, I can use the tilde. Now, an interesting thing that happens here is that history isn't much use to me. Here I am in my home directory. I want to go to the documents directory. I'll just fire up the command I used last time, and it didn't work. Well, that's because it was a relative path, and the current directory I'm now in is not the same directory I was in when I wrote that relative path. Okay, let's look at this the new way. If I choose something called navd, and there's an easy way to install this, which will be explained later, there's nothing. There's something called the navd stack, but there's nothing in the navd stack. And there's something called navh, which is getting run. There's nothing in that either. And this .navignore file, that's just something that you can put in to remove the extra clutter if you do use navd and find a point where what it shows you for convenience from your history is getting too long and you want to cut it down. I'm going to choose navd and go to movies. Same thing. Navd to documents. Same thing we saw before. Although now, movies and documents are both on the navd stack. If I go back to my root directory, and I didn't use a navd command for that because that's so short to type, and then I choose navd, there are two places I can go, numbered 0 and 1. Now I can use history. What's this? History actually fixed itself. That's not the relative path anymore. It changed it automatically to the absolute path. Well, that was handy. But you can also do nav0 to go to the first thing on the list. So now I've moved to movies. You can do nav1 to go to the second thing on the list. So that's going to documents. And the next thing I'm going to do is write out my history and actually open a new window so that we can see what navd would behave like now in a fresh start. So here's navd. This is a brand new window, but we have history from yesterday, let's say. Okay, well, the navd stack is empty, but it's running navh just in case that's helpful. And indeed, navh is showing us that these are things we put on the navd stack yesterday. If I want the same things on the navd stack from yesterday, I can just highlight them, paste them in, and then those two things will be in the navd stack. And that's all there is to navd to begin with. There's a lot more features to it, but that covers what we're trying to accomplish. Under the covers, navd has a lot to do with pushd. pushd is a built-in way of navigating in a bash shell, and it's handy to know, but kind of limited. So the dirs command works with pushd, and also the popd command works with pushd. The dirs command simply shows what pushd knows about. So far, pushd knows about the home directory for this user. Let's put another directory on the pushd stack. And now pushd knows about two directories, the home directory and the music directory. But here's something odd. It looks like we can convince pushd to forget about the music directory and remember a different directory instead, simply by using the change directory command. I'll change directory to the pictures command, and then use the dirs command to find out what pushd knows about. And now it knows about the home directory and the pictures directory. It seems to have forgotten all about the music directory. So the thing to take away from all this is simply that pushd does not really know about that first directory listed. That first directory is not really on the stack. Pushd is just saying, hey, it knows what the current directory is. And pushd knows about the home directory and the music directory now. So let's add to the stack. We're adding the documents directory to the stack. And now we'll add a few other directories using both absolute paths and relative paths. We'll go to a fancy directory name with a space in it. And we're going to change directories and then use a relative path from there to add the utility directory. And the path we've put on the stack is the home directory, music directory, documents directory, the Groovy directory, and the utility subdirectory of the Groovy directory. So here's our history. And let's go backwards. Let's use the popd to go back the way we came. Now we're back to the Groovy directory instead of in the utilities directory. Now we're back to documents. Now we're back to music. And now we're back to home. Notice, if I try to go back in history and use my pushd utility command, that doesn't work. I'm not in the right place. It's a relative path, and that's simply not going to work. So for a quick review, the three commands pushd, dirs or dirs, and popd, they work together. They provide some basic navigation. But the thing is, this is only to navigate out and back one time. Using popd navigates, but it also wipes out whatever pushd had remembered on your behalf. So here's navd used to travel the same path to those very same places. Now pretend that we went to some of those on some previous day. We don't know what order we did that in. But we went there in another terminal session, and we used navd to get to those places. In that case, we have history. Here are all the navd commands in our command history. So those are much easier to see if we use the built-in navd history command, which is called navh, and it dedupes and sorts what it finds in our command history. Now just by copy and paste, we'll put some of that history onto the navd stack. Music directory, and the documents and Groovy directory. Now let's take that same trip that we took with pushd and popd, but with navd instead. So we'll go first to our user home directory. Then we're going to go to the first directory we want it to head out to. Now the second one. And the third one, the groovy directory. And we'll just change directories with a relative path to the utility directory. So that was going out. Now let's go back the way we came, using navd. Now we're back at the groovy directory. We just count down, nav3, nav2, nav1. Now, of course, the nice thing about navd is we could have done that in any order. And we can do that again and repeat that as much as we want to. Even simpler, let's do the same thing with navd, but this time we won't even use history. And we'll start at the home directory, where we'll use navd dot, a relative path, but it'll get remembered as an absolute path. Go to the music directory, the documents directory, this groovy directory, which is a long path, and the utility path directory under groovy, again using a relative path. So we've got it all set up. The thing is, we've gone out, and with navd you can rotate the stack. Unlike pushd, this is not destructive. Nothing is forgotten. So let's go back the way we came, using navd and rotation. We only ever use one command, navd -1. And we're just going to go right back. Now it's groovy, now it's documents, now it's music, and now we're back at the home directory. Do you want to start that rotation all over again? With pushd you could never do that, but with navd it's no problem. Here's the first step. Does it look familiar? Same command. Just go through the rotation. Navd was inspired by pushd. And not only that, under the covers, navd actually uses pushd and popd. It's kind of like navd is really a wrapper around the pushd, dirs, popd functionality. And that's what makes the actual navd program really pretty darn simple and easy to install. So here's proof that navd uses the pushd stack. Now look, the popd command actually changes the navd stack. See, it's shrinking each time we use popd. We started with 5, and now we wound up with 2. So next, let's go onward to installation, which is really easy. But before that, there is something related to installation. It's sort of tuning the installation after the fact. Here's how to use the navh-ignore file. So you see how it says 0 unique lines are in the navh-ignore file? And maybe there's too many things listed in my nav history. I mean, maybe there are some of those folders that don't exist anymore. Maybe I renamed them, so they're really useless. Let's put those in the navh-ignore file. And now, when I do navh, they don't show up. And you have a clue that there are things in your navh-ignore file, just because at least you know how many lines are in it. And that's all there is to using the .navh-ignore.
To install navd, you just copy a block of text into the .bashrc file. Now, where do you get that text? Just go to Google. Navd can be found at the Unix Stack Exchange at this URL, 229.161. And this is an article that explains a lot about it. But really, we just need this block of text. That's all we need. Copy that. Go back to the terminal. We're in our home directory, vi.bashrc. Come down to the bottom, insert, paste. I guess I didn't get it. Copy. paste, and then exit. Now, just so you know, you don't even have to put it in the .bashrc file. You could simply paste right here. Now, that's not going to make a permanent installation, but as soon as you paste like that in any window, there's a whole bunch of commands, there's a whole bunch of aliases being created. navd will work. It'll work for the duration of that terminal session. So you can try this out without even installing it, essentially. Install it only for one terminal session, try it out, see if you like it, and once you exit that terminal session, there'll be no trace. So I hope you've enjoyed this, and I hope you enjoy using navd.